Hello, welcome back. It's Wednesday. It's a special edition of our virtual happy hour, and it's also UK week, so we're super excited about all that. And we have an amazing guest today talking a little bit about the beers of Manchester, UK. I'll bring them on the screen here. Steve Dunkley. And Steve, tell everyone where you are and where you're from. Leave your own introduction.
Right. Oh, God, that could go on a long time. So shortly, I'm Steve. I run Beer Nouveau in Manchester, UK. It's a small brewery by most people's standards and tiny by American standards. We only do 6 barrels at a time, so about 800 to 900 litres. And that's on our big kit. Our small kit's only 25 litres. We're really down to home brew level here, but it fills up one of these wood casks. Yeah, so we're based in Manchester, and we specialise in heritage and historic brewing. So for us, the older the better, really.
I love it. Awesome. Well, before we get into all the details and talk with me about all the great stuff that you're doing, the most important part of our virtual happy hours is actually the beer. So what are you drinking on your side, Steve, that you want to share with us today?
Well, I'm drinking this one. This is one of our barrel-aged East India porters. We did this as part of as a crowdfunder. We did this. This is the first one to be released from it. So this was a traditional 1868 recipe. We got the malt specially kilned with the help of Chris Maltings for this, and sat in the barrel for 12 months on Brett. So it's one of these ones that's just sort of like proving that you can drink dark beer on a hot day, because it's way too hot here at the moment. We don't do hot weather in England, especially not in Manchester. Really, by now we should be about 6 inches of rain an hour, and we're not. We're 30 degrees, and it's too much. It really is.
Well, I'm drinking on my side. This one's, I don't have any, unfortunately, UK beers. If I'm drinking a local beer, and you're drinking a local beer, I'll do the same on my end. This one is called Block Party. This is from a brewery called Pottertown up in New Haven, Connecticut. It's a lager. Like you mentioned, it's also super hot here today as well. So for me, whenever it gets really hot outside, I always try to crack open a nice craft lager or a Pilsner. Always refreshes my taste as well. So if you're out there too and you're drinking a beer, I know it's 3 o'clock on the East Coast here, but obviously over in London or UK, it's plenty of time to open up a pint. So crack open your beer and make sure you check in on Untappd and tag Untappd at home, which is a great venue to keep yourself safe. Let everyone know that you're actually drinking safely and responsibly, and you also see everyone else drinking around the world. It's a great way to kind of join the party in this horrible time of COVID now. But cheers to everybody watching now. We appreciate it. Thank you, Steve, for joining us, and enjoy your beverage.
Oh, I am doing. This is on weather like this. It's got to be either lager or porter, and anything else is just filling in the gaps, really.
I agree. Especially a nice craft lager, a nice crisp flavor to it. That's like the beer itself is definitely quenching my thirst from that side there. So let's get right into it. You talked a little bit about your background on what you do with the brewery, but how did you get started in this particular field? Obviously, you have your brewery, you have your bar, your tap room. Where did it all start from that perspective?
There's a wonderful loophole in English law about how young you can be to start drinking. It's all about supply. You can't buy it if you're under 18. You can't sell it if you're under 18 to somebody under 18. You can't give it to somebody under 18. But if you make it yourself, there's no law about it. So when I was 14, I bought my dad a homebrew kit, and because he's the sort of person who's got no hobbies at all whatsoever. and he didn't use it. And I've just got one of these minds. I love finding out how things work. So I used it, and the beer that came out was absolutely disgusting by all accounts. So I just went down to the local homebrew shop, had a chat with them, and I think I confused them a lot, that there's this very precocious 14-year-old just asking them about where did I go wrong. And then, well, you bought the wrong kit to start with, and because it was one of these ones, it looked like a malt sack, and it had a sort of like what do you call it? A hole at the top. You poured a cap on top. You poured the hot water into, and then 2 weeks later, you poured really disgusting beer at the bottom of it. So I talked to them about that, and they said, well, maybe you should look into trying it with this and trying it with that. And I was thinking, on the one hand, this is really quite cool that I'm 14 years old and I'm in a homebrew shop talking to these people about this. And on the other hand, maybe they shouldn't be encouraging me to be making my own beer. But I used some kit with my pocket money, and this is sounding really Dickensian and very dodgy. Do not drink if you're under 18. Really don't. This was a different era back then. But I bought the kit. I got the ingredients. I went home and I made something that was even worse. But I had no hobbies either. It was either that or computers, and they weren't around at the time. So I just carried on. And when I was 18, I got a job in a bar as a glass collector. And within 6 months, I was the assistant manager. I was absolutely hooked. This is back in the mid-90s, which, in my opinion, was when the first sort of like craft boom happened in the UK. We were seeing breweries like Hotback and Roosters and Oakham. Now, these ones, these days, you don't really hear of them so much, but they were starting to use American hops. They were bringing them over. I mean, the guy over at Roosters, whose name escapes me at the moment, he was forcing some of the hop producers to fact pack into foil instead of into hop bags. So he was bringing the hops over, and he was producing these wonderful, big, juicy hopped beers in the mid-90s, way ahead of his time. And the pub that I was working in, we were selling them, and we just suddenly realised that there's these wonderful beers out there. It doesn't all have to be boring brown bitter. So I just got going with that. And then after a while, I started thinking, well, hang on, some of these boring brown bitters I was actually really enjoying. So I started looking into the history of those and what they used to be like before, in the history. What was it about them that made them become so universally available throughout the country? Why did those particular beers and those particular breweries become so dominant? And when you look at the original recipes and then you recreate them, you realize because the beer was actually really good. So you can then redo it, and you think, well, originally these beers were great. So you start reproducing them and that, and then you go back further and further and further. And next thing you know, you've licensed your homebrew kit in your garage, and then within a year, you've taken on a railway arch, and within a couple of years, you got a bar, and it just kind of spiraled and snowballed, and it just got a little bit out of control. All I wanted was a little homebrew kit and a small bar in my garage with a dartboard and a couple of sofas for me and my mates to get drunk at the weekend.
There you are today. It's fantastic.
And here I am today. Yeah,
exactly. Very cool. If you joined us today, we're talking to Steve Dunkley, who is the owner of his brewery that you just talked about here. If you have questions for Steve, you want to put him on the hot seat. He loves to answer those really important questions that make you cringe from that perspective there. So use your platform, Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, and put them in there, and we'll try to get some of these on the screens here. Ultimately, you described earlier on with your brewery being more of a historic and heritage brewing production. What does that mean for someone that maybe not understand specifically about what that style of beer is from that side?
It's mostly looking at where beer came from. That's pretty much it. It's we've worked with archaeologists and Egyptian what they call Egyptologists. We've worked with students of history to look at how some of the Egyptian, the Viking styles, all of these, going right back to see how beer started. But it's also how it progressed and where the beers that we drink now come from and why that they've come there. It's that one thing that Nat said last night. She's a wealth of knowledge.
She is.
One thing she was saying last night about the American lagers and the influence that came from the Germany and the Czech and the Dutch as well. One thing that we've found by rebrewing some of the old recipes from all over Europe is one of the other heavy influences on American beer was actually the Scottish. Scottish shilling ales, you hear about them and you think, yeah, they're dark and they're sweet and they're quite thick and cloyy because Scotland is this damp, miserable country. So that's the sort of beer that you want to suit that weather. When in actual fact, the shilling ales weren't. The shilling ales were lovely, really light, really juicy hoppy beers because the majority of hops that they used in them was cluster, an American hop. It's the grandfather of most American hops. So all of these beers that were, going, because they were brewing those and shipping them back to the States. So that had a massive influence on it as well. So it's just looking at the history of where all of these beers have come in from and then rebrewing them and seeing what they were actually like. And and just kind of going from there.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a good point. And I think that there's not a lot of breweries, at least from the U.S. side, that really specialize in that kind of stuff there. But so it's interesting to hear your expertise on this matter. But, obviously I can ask you questions all I want, but we want the audience out there to ask some questions. Let's throw up one on the screen here. This is from Beavis, and he says, question received. What or extinct style would you like to see have a revival that has potentially had been gone away for a long time?
I know the answer he wants to this, and I'm not brewing cock ale again. I would love Egyptian ale to come back. The Egyptian ales, everybody thinks about that. You've got the story that the Egyptians paid their slaves in beer to keep them quiet and all this. It's rubbish. Egyptian ale is this wonderfully. These days we'd consider it to be something like a cherry sour. It's really light in body. It was mostly wheat. They use dates and they use grapes. The closest you get to a yeast with it is the modern day Kvike yeast. So it's this wonderfully semi-wild fermented, really light, really fruit beer, really, really refreshing. And they mostly used it in religious ceremonies. And it was a real sort of like privilege to be able to get their beer. I'd love to see more of that being brewed. I think there's only the two breweries in the UK that have done it. There was us and there was a brewery in London, and I was very lucky to talk to their brewer. And she'd worked with serious professionals about it. I just worked with a guy that was at the university down the road, and we just decided it was a nice thing to do. But she worked with serious professionals about it, and we managed to sort of like share tasting notes, and we kind of come up with the opinion that both of our beers were very, very similar. It's just so lovely, so refreshing, and I would love to see more of that about.
Very good. Awesome. Let's go to another question here. This one's from Paul, and Paul has asked, until I've lost the question, and here we go. Paul Dunkley, what are your thoughts on heritage beers that the UK breweries do? Are they really heritage? Putting on the spot here.
Yeah, he really has. I tweeted out, must be about a year or two ago, a flowchart of is a beer heritage or not. I think the best we can do is for the majority of breweries is inspired by. This beer that I'm drinking at the moment, this one, we got the malt specially kilned for this. This is using crisp Chevalier. We got it kilned to an 1870s malt kilning pattern. No other brewery has done that. You can use Chevalier, which is an amazing malt. There's no doubt about it. Massive kudos to Chris Martins for doing this. It sounds like I'm, name dropping for them, and really so. They've done an amazing job bringing back some of these malts. And if you're doing a heritage brew without the right ingredients, you're not doing a heritage brew. You're doing something inspired by it. I don't have an issue with that. I think it's a very good thing to do. We need to look at these old recipes and we need to look at how they were done. But unless you really go full into it and in depth about how they brewed it, how they aged it, there's so many things that you don't. We assume stuff, and it's like an assumption with IPAs. The heritage IPAs where they were quite sweet. Because we look at the brewing records of them, and the final gravity is about 1025 to 1030. So it's quite a sweet beer. But they then went in. So a lot of people they're rebrewing these heritage IPAs, and they're finishing off the gravity at that point. But what's happened back then was they then put them into barrels for 18 months. And these barrels were inoculated with Brettanomyces, which would eat all of the complex sugars. So they were brewed at the mashed at a higher temperature to give these complex sugars, which then fed the Brettanomyces yeast over 18 months. And that process in the barrel made sure that there was a constant outlet of carbon dioxide. So you imagine, these barrels behind us, it would normally come in, but this constant CO2 production pushed out of the barrel to stop any air coming in, so they didn't oxidize in the time that they were maturing, ready to then be shipped over 12 months later. So unless you're doing that, it's not the full-on heritage recreation. You can look at what the final product was and say, well, yeah, we can make that a lot quicker now and make it like that. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I don't have an issue with any of these. What it really comes down to is, do you enjoy drinking it?
Yeah, that is the most important part of anything with you, right? Is it a good beer? Speaking of these old kind of styles here, there's a great question that got introduced by Adrian, and Adrian thanks for writing in again here. Where do the old recipes come from? Where do you find them to be able to kind of get this stuff to the lips of a brewer or lips of a drinker?
There is one person in particular whose name must be on the list of every single brewer who looks into old brewing, and it's a guy called Ron Pattinson. This guy, he describes himself as having an unhealthy obsession with old recipes. He goes around the old breweries photographing their brewing records. The brewing records only really started in the late 1700s, early 1800s. But he goes around and he just photographs all of them, and then he goes through and he translates them, and he works out what they're actually talking about with them all. He pubs out a lot of books, and seriously, if you're looking to rebrew old recipes, buy his books. I think I'm his biggest marketing person for him. So initially I started with those, and then I now sort of like deal directly with some of the breweries myself, or the breweries that have got the rights to those names and those recipes. So Ron Pattinson, he's got a wonderful website called Shut Up About Barclay Perkins, which is a bit of an in-joke amongst the beer historian circles. And it's just full of so much knowledge about brewing history. But what we've been able to do is we've been able to take his research and actually turn it into sort of like real world stuff. So the first time I met him, we'd done something for Manchester Beer Week. We'd done several breweries in Manchester had done beers based on old Manchester brewery recipes, but we'd done one in a wood cask because we've got them. And he was giving this talk, trying all the beers, talking about them all. And he did say to me afterwards, he said to the public, he didn't up to that point believe that wood cask made that much of a difference to the flavour of a beer. But having tried it, it totally changed the way that he looked at beer history and the way that he thought that the brewing worked with it. And it does. This is the other thing with sort of like heritage brewing. If you take even a beer recipe from the 1920s, 1930s, and you put that beer into a steel cask or even into a plastic cask, it's going to taste completely different than if you put it into a wood cask. And this is why you've kind of, again, got to go as fully into recreation as you possibly can.
Absolutely.
Does that answer the question?
I think so. Well, hopefully, Kirk, you're impressed by the answer as much as I am. So that's a very good thing on that front. Let's shift gears here a little bit, Steve, talking a little bit about Manchester and the beer scene that's up there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, obviously, being in this industry for so long, how the process and how the brewers have obviously increased significantly since the early days. What's the scene like right now in Manchester in terms of the beer, and is it considered a little London of the north, or what is the kind of scene there from the brewery perspective comparing to London?
We're better than London.
There you go.
Shots fired. I can say this is the southerner that's moved up here. I'm not originally from Manchester. I moved here about 13 years ago. I've run pubs all around the south, and I moved up here. London has some amazing breweries. I'm not going to deny that. It has some superb pubs. It really does. But Manchester has them close by to each other. So if you can imagine, several years ago, about 6 years ago, I went to Boonfield Beer Festival over in California. Had one of the best days of my life getting very drunk there. I had the brewers tickets, which nobody told me until afterwards. That meant I didn't have to queue. I could have gone and helped myself, but I think they knew what I think. So while I was there, we went on a brew tap call. So we went to Beartown, we went to Russian River, we went to Stump, we went to a couple of other places, and it took all day to go to 5 brew taps. On the street that I'm on, there's 5 brew taps. That's on this one street, and it's kind of the same. London has as good breweries and bars as Manchester, but in Manchester you can walk between them all. That's this is why I think Manchester is, in my opinion, is the best city in the world to go drinking. It may not have the best breweries in the world, it may not have the best bars in the world, but whatever you look for in a brewery, whatever you look for in a beer, whatever you look for in a bar, we've got a lot of really good ones, all within walking distance of each other. So yeah, Manchester's brilliant. London's down south.
Well, obviously with COVID-19, people aren't traveling as much as is. But if somebody were to travel up to Manchester, what would be some of your hot places to go to that they cannot miss? Obviously, your bar and your brewery being one of them. But other places people might want to be able to visit for getting that really local feel, local brewery or local bar.
I would say you need 3 days in Manchester minimum.
Okay.
On the first day, you come and start at us, purely because we're slightly further out of town than everyone else. And from us, you then wander down the road and you go to Manchester Union. Now, these guys make really good lager. They only make lager and they make really, really good lager. A couple of doors down from then, you've got Wander Beyond, who specialise in barrel-aged milk stouts and really, really good ones. A couple of doors down from, well, actually next door to them, you've got Alphabet Brewing Company. About 5 minutes walk, you've got Track, you've got Cloudwater. And then a 10-minute walk on a quick Uber across the city centre. You've got Runaway, you've got Blackjack, you've got Beatniks, you've got Seven Brothers Tap in the city centre. So you can spend one day just doing the brew taps in the city centre. Another day, awesome. It's brilliant. Another day you can then spend doing the rest of the bars in the city centre, or even just spend the morning doing the brew taps and then the night doing all of the bars in the city centre. So that's either 1 or 2 days. I mean, you've got places like the Marble Arch. Nat mentioned it last night. Matt will probably mention it tomorrow because it is such a great pub. You've got the Crown and Kettle. It's an amazing boozer as well. You've got the Smithfield. You've got some Cafe Beermont. You've got some really, really good pubs in the city centre, and these are amazing places. So you were talking last night about the sort of boozer you like. I think you used the word quaint several times. I think I counted.
Yes, 5. I did.
They are all these sort of like old school quaint boozers, and you can just sit there and you can have a pint, and it's really well looked after, and you can just chill and relax. And then the other day, I would say get out to Chorlton. It's a suburb of Manchester, and you can just spend all day wandering along, eating great food, drinking great beer. And that's on the food side. If you're in Manchester, go to Grub. It's this street food market. The guy who runs it is probably the most passionate about street food of anybody you'll ever meet anywhere, and he's just this amazing job doing that. He helps people set up their business there. I think this is the one thing about Manchester that I do really love is everybody helps each other get up and running. We don't see people as competitors; we see them as mates. So it's like when we entered lockdown. And everybody we're shut. Now I'm in a very lucky situation that my venue here it's just an empty railway arch. I can do what I like with it. One thing I was able to do, it took a couple of weeks. I built a bar in my loading bay door, so people were able to get their takeouts there, which included coming up with their milk bottles, filling them up, and taking 2 steps back and opening them and drinking them in the street. No laws were broken. So we were doing that. We were selling other people's beers, and we acted as a click and collect point for them, so people were able to order them online and pick them up from us. And Cloudwater down the road, they used their web shop and their national distribution to sell bottles and cans for other breweries all over the country. We don't have competitors in this industry at this level. You might, when you get up to a slightly larger thing, they start seeing us as competitors. But at our level, no, we don't. We help each other out and we do what we can. You go into any bar or brewery bar or any brew tap in Manchester, you say, where should I go next? They'll talk your ear off and they'll say, oh, yeah, go to see these guys. This guy's working tonight. Ask him about this. He'll sort you out with this. And yeah, it's such a great atmosphere. So again, we've got that up on London.
Awesome. Well, we're doing this today. We're talking to Steve Dunkley, who's in Manchester, UK. And I want to put this up there on the screen right here from Mark. It says Manchester let Steve in and never regretted it. So thanks, Mark, for that piece there. If you have a question for Steve, let us know in the chat. You can use Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, and we'll be happy to see if we can put it on the screen. A lot of chats have come in here, a lot of questions here. Here's a great one from Sandy, and Sandy asks, what would you regard as do's and don'ts when it comes to brewing a barley wine?
Oh, okay. For me, there's two sorts of barley wines. There's an English barley wine and an American barley wine. And these it's a really interesting, because an American barley wine by the BJCP standards has to be a minimum of 10%, whereas an English barley wine is a maximum of 8.5% to 9%. So English barley wines, they don't even class as a barley wine in the States. But one thing I would say for an English barley wine, stick with old school malts. Don't get fancy with it. Just straight out Golden Promise or Maris Otter, or if you can, Chevalier. That's it. Nothing else. And old school bittering hops, no aroma hops, at least for the first 6 to 8 months. And then maybe just a little bit of Goldings, but just keep it as simple as possible and leave it alone. Now, for American barley wine, just shove the lot in.
Oh, that's some good advice from there. Let's go to another question here. It's talking a little bit about United States and UK. Here's a question from Brian Wagner. It says, Steve, what are your independent brewers from the United States? Are in your top 3? You talked about your trip over to California.
Yeah.
What would you consider some of your top 3 from a U.S. perspective as you see over in the UK?
Straight in the number 1 is Russian River.
Oh, yeah.
I'm probably going to lose a lot of friends and kudos in this. I don't like Pliny.
You like Blind Pig better?
I think it's a decent beer, but their sours are storming. Yeah. They're world leading. Supplication, especially. Oh yes, I would do some very rude things for a lifetime supply of Supplication. It's an amazing beer. I also really like Anderson Valley Brewery. It's a really nice sort of like the range of beers that they do. I just really like them. I think they're solid. They're really quite good. Oh God, now for the number 3, it gets a bit tricky, because they're for a lot of the time with beer, it's the situation that you're drinking it in that makes it the beer really good. And the 2 that I'd put it between would either be Sierra Nevada or Brooklyn. And the one where I'd say Brooklyn is because when we get it over here, it's a decent beer, but it's nothing special. But I was staying with a friend in New Jersey, and we went out for pizza, and they had Brooklyn Lager on there, and it was the only beer that they had on. It's either that or Guinness. It was like, I could get Guinness any day, I can get Brooklyn any day, but yeah, seeing as I'm over, I'll get Brooklyn. And it was so good. It suited the humidity, it suited the atmosphere. It was just absolutely stunning. But I got very drunk at Boonville Beer Festival talking to the staff from Nevada. I didn't realize they were the brewers, and I was not initially too nice about their beers. Sierra Nevada Pale is a very, very good standard beer. I can't fault it on its quality. I can't fault it on what it is. If you want that sort of beer, it's lovely. But at the time, it was everywhere over here, and there was as good beers brewed over here. And it was like, yeah, it's nice, but we get it everywhere, and yeah, there are better beers out there. And then they got me to try some of their rare stuff that they brought over in cornies from the brewery just for that, and yeah, absolutely stunning. Some of the stuff that they do. But this is the problem with American breweries for the UK. We don't see the good stuff in general. Right. We're lucky in Manchester. We've got Beermoth and their pub Cafe Beermoth, who specialise in shipping in American beers. But before they opened, we don't see the nice stuff. We see the export, and then that works both ways as well. It's very rarely that in another country, unless you go over there, you get the good stuff. You get the mass produced. Let's just ship that out. So going over to the States was a real eye opener about how great American beer actually was. And up to that point, it's like, yeah, this is decent, but it doesn't really suit our climate, which I didn't realize until I went over there. And then coming back, it's like, why don't we have this now? This doesn't taste as good as it did back over there. So yeah, Russian River, then Anderson Valley, and then either Sierra Nevada or Brooklyn, and that kind of sounds like these are big breweries, but this is what we get.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't go there very much. I'm a pauper. I can't spend much money. Just like drink my own beer.
There you go, right? Well, speaking of breweries, it's a great question here that got popped up from Casper. And Casper, it's over in the Netherlands. I think we've reached a maximum number of breweries, a marketing handle. How is it in the UK? It was over 3,000 brewers. Do you see this number getting bigger, or is this something where we've kind of reached the cap in terms of that area there?
Short or long answer?
We'll do the short one so we can have more questions.
We can have a lot more breweries.
Yeah. There you go. That's a short answer.
One of the problems that we have is distribution. It's not the number of breweries, it's the distribution.
Right.
I sell 90 to 95% of my beer over my own bar here. We could go back to how we used to do. I mean, in the area that I'm in at the moment in Manchester, I'm in an area called Ardwick. There are 2 pubs. One of them is attached to a music venue. Well, it's next door to a music venue, and one of them is my brewery tap. Going back 200 years, there was in Ardwick itself, I think there was something like 500 pubs. And in that area, so in Ardwick now, there are 3 breweries. Going back 200 years, there was 50. It's not, but most of them were only selling to 2 or 3 pubs in and around where they were. It's not so much can the market handle more breweries, it's can we get enough pubs to want more breweries, or can the pubs sell to just 2 or 3 of them? It's market distribution. Me personally, I would love to see us go back to breweries always selling direct, get rid of the sort of like the tie that we have, and just allow for lots and lots of different breweries with 3 or 4 pubs that they own, and then the free houses that pick and choose what they want to do. I mean, this is one of the great things about bottle shops, in my opinion, is you can go into a supermarket and there's this range of beers, and supermarkets over here are so much different from the supermarkets that say, my God, your supermarkets are amazing for beer. So when I was over there, we had a camper van, and we just, we were driving around California for 2 weeks, and we went to the first supermarket just to get supplies. And your beer aisles are the size of some of our supermarkets, and you've got really good beers in them as well. It's like, this is stunning. Over here, you've got 4 or 5 different breweries in most of the supermarkets, and that's it. But lots of their different brands.
Right.
They cater to what they cater to, but it's kind of the same with the pubs. Most of the pubs will only buy in from several different breweries, but if that could be broken, we could have so many more breweries, so much more choice for everybody. But it's market forces. People buy what they buy.
Yeah, exactly. It's an important part. You do mention we have these huge, alcohol stores in the United States, Total Wines, the Bevmos, the big ones out there that are dedicated specific to it. But while there's a lot of choices, a really key point there is people buy what they buy. I mean, you could be a small brewer and still be on the shelf, but if you don't have product placement or if it's something else, you just don't get. People don't buy it. So that's why it's a big proponent of bars and restaurants having that stuff on draft, having it available. So when you go there, you can kind of pick and choose what you want, as opposed to committing to maybe a 6-pack or a 4-pack of maybe something you don't know from that perspective.
Yeah.
On there.
And this is why, I mean, for me personally, I think it's a great thing with a lot of the venues that you can go to when the staff know what they're selling. So especially with regulars, they can walk in and you can turn around to them and say, we've got one on that I think you will really like. So the staff that know what the regulars like and what flavors they like, is like, they can also turn around and say, this might be a little unusual for you, but give it a go. So good bar staff paid them well, really paid them well.
100% agree. Let's ask a few more questions here. This one's from Jamie.
Just one quick thing. This, by the way, is the IPA that we're the East India Pale Ale. That is the original color of IPA.
Wow, so, that's a very good thing.
I'm only butting in because I'm about to finish it and move on to a cider. So. Oh, next question. So
there we go. So Jamie, beer novelties like ice cream floaters, mustard beers that just came out this past week, and beers aged in chicken carcasses. Have they gone too far, or is this kind of innovation to stay relevant?
Okay, let's start with the chicken carcass one. I mentioned earlier,
I have not heard this one before, so I'm going to look up this exactly after this here.
I don't know if that somebody's done it recently other than me. In the 1700s, there was a beer called cock ale. It was a beer brewed with chicken. Now, recently, I know that somebody's done it. They've chucked a couple of buckets of KFC in there. In the 1700s, this was a standard thing, and we rebrewed it. And it was a bit of a tricky one for me because Beer Nouveau is a vegan brewery. We don't use any animal products here at all. We don't use honey or anything like that. It was just a decision that we made when we started up. I mean, my wife's vegetarian. She's been, she was vegetarian since she was 14. She was vegan for most of that. Yeah. So we made that decision. And so when it came to recreating, there was 2 historical recipes that I wanted to do. One had beef extract in it. Well, when they first brewed it, it had half a cow in it. But I can't do that these days. and the other, I did actually have a word with an abattoir, and they're like, no. When I then mentioned it to environmental health, they used more words, but there weren't many syllables in them. So but the thing with the cock ale, it was when they were brewing it, it's a 3-hour boil. So we had a bit of a look at this recipe. I'm like, 3-hour boil sounds a bit stupid, but cocks back then, they were these game birds. They were old stringy birds, so it took 3 hours to boil them. So if you're boiling them just to eat them, it took 3 hours. And also back then, hops were stupidly expensive, so you boiled them as long as you could to get as much of the flavors, as much of the acids out of them for the bitterness and the flavors that you could. So what I reckon happened is that somebody was there one day and they had one pot going for 3 hours boiling up the hops, another one that was going for 3 hours boiling up chicken, and just stuck the chicken into it. So if you're going to put it, you might as well chuck it in there as well. And then you're not using as much firewood. And the beer that came out of it, it was beer. It was decent. It was all right. It wasn't, too bad. The chicken was amazing. It was absolutely gorgeous. Hot boiled chicken is it is absolutely lovely. It was one of the best sandwiches I've ever had. So yeah, I would definitely say that. Do I think people are going too far with a lot of stuff these days? No, do it. Why not? There's very little that's new in brewing. People have done it before. If you find something new, try it. Why not try it? It might be nice. If it's rubbish, tip it down the drain, or drink it, go down the drain, whatever you like to do with it. Why waste alcohol? So yeah, go for it. I don't think it's gone too far. I don't think it's people trying it just to say, people are trying it to pay to sell it, to pay bills. The mention of the mustard bill, I was chatting with a couple of people about this earlier. It was very small scale for that brewery. I think it's brilliant promotion on it. They released the homebrew recipe so people themselves can brew it. Right. Go for it. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big thing nowadays with these experimental things, and over in the States here, I'm not sure if it's got its way over to the UK where we have these slushy beers or ice cream-ish beers that have become the. I mean, from all due respect, and we have a lot of hard seltzers that are becoming really big as well. So for us, it's also about experimentation. I'm kind of with you that sure they're different, but doesn't mean that they're bad. If you don't like them, you don't like them, and you can try something different.
Absolutely.
If you really want to.
I actually brewed a hard seltzer last week, so please forgive me.
Yeah. Hey, it's everyone's wants, and you got to brew what people want. Let's do a few more questions here as we're getting into the end of our segment here. This one. Let's do this one. This one is from Dragon's Screed 1. What is your thorough on your new thoughts on your new kegs compared to wooden or steel kegs?
Key kegs compared to wooden and steel casks. One of the great things about key kegs is they stop any form of gas or oxygen get into the beer. That's great. wooden casks. If you just chuck your standard beer into them, it's going to oxygenate or oxidize. If you do the same beer into a steel keg, it won't oxidize, but it'll condition in a different way. It's the same question as sticking it into a bottle, sticking it into a can, sticking it through a hand pull and sparkler, sticking it through a sticking it through a keg dispense. When you brew the beer and when you then package it, you've got to keep in mind what sort of dispenser it's going to go through. And if you don't, you could turn around and in a way and say, well, this beer is going to be drunk by being left in a bowl overnight, or this beer is going to be drunk by being left in the can in the fridge. You've got to know. This is in my opinion, you've got to know how your beer is going to be distributed, how it's going to be served, how it's going to be drunk, and then you package and you prep the beer for that. In the 1800s, they were able to ship a beer halfway around the world and have it in peak condition at that point. And because the brewers knew that that's what was going to happen with it, so they brewed and that did beer for that. So as brewers these days, we have to do the same. We have to know how we're going to package it, and we have to know how we're going to distribute it. And as such, we should be brewing and packaging according for that. So yeah, we've got to take into account what we're actually doing, or how the beer is going to get to the drinker. And any brewer just turns to us and say, "Well, we're doing it this way. You've now got to sort it out." Well, yeah, you've been a bit of an idiot with that. Sorry. We've got to work. You can't just turn around and say, "We've made this beer. It's awesome. Go off." You've got to know what's happening with it when it leaves your brewery, because it's going to be until it gets into somebody's glass and they drink it, or until somebody drinks it, it's still your process as far as I see this. And any bar that we send your beer out to, or sort of like any shop that's serving it or sort of stocking it, you need to work with them. You need to know how they're going to look after it, regardless of what packaging it's in. You need to know what they're looking for, and you need to work with them so that it reaches the drinker in the best possible way.
Couldn't agree more.
That question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Steve, I want to thank you so much for your time and attending our Untapped virtual happy hour. It was a lot of fun talking with you about all the great things you're doing. And, we've talked on Twitter numerous times over the last couple of years. We've never met each other virtually. So I think it's just pretty awesome in the world that we live in.
Loving it. I mean, I could go on for another couple of hours. So,
just like Nat yesterday, the same situation. But definitely appreciate it. I want to give you an opportunity to give any shout outs you want to give. I have some chats in the channel here about people that want to buy your beer online. Maybe any updates on that, or anything you want to share with the community.
I don't sell online much. I don't sell my beer out my brewery much. I will just say, if you come to Manchester, come and visit us. Not just to buy my beer, but to chat about beer. We'll tell you where everyone else is to go. And the main shout is tune in tomorrow to sit here to listen to Matt, because he's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Steve. We appreciate you, and thank you for being part of the show.
Oh, cheers. Thank you.
Cheers. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for watching our special Wednesday virtual hour edition for UK, our second day. Tomorrow, we're talking to Matt Curtis, who's going to be our last of our UK edition here. As Steve just said, we're super excited to talk to him. A lot of beer photography questions, a lot of articles, a lot of amazing stuff that Matt is doing, and his new magazine that he's launching as well. Also, he announced earlier he's having a brand new book that he's going to be doing, talking a lot about that as well. So tune in tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. British Standard Time, or summertime. I think that's what it's called. So I apologize. And I hope to see you back then. Thank you so much for watching, and cheers.